All right. Well, I just want to welcome everybody to tonight's information session on, we have another person joining us real quick. So tonight's information session is on stable accounts and trusts. My name's Melissa Nichols. I'm the Community Relations Director at Riverside, the Miami County Board of Developmental Disabilities. And we have with us tonight Laura Drake from the Community Fund Management Foundation. She has been a guest speaker for us for many, many years and has shared tons of wisdom with us on a variety of subjects, including the stable accounts trusts, guardianship, gosh, I think Social Security. You shared a lot of knowledge with us over the years, Laura.
I know a little bit about everything.
Yes, that is true. But sometimes you know a lot about something in particular. And so we really appreciate when you're able to, to impart that knowledge with us. So a few items, just in case anybody did not pick up on it, we are recording this session tonight. So folks who aren't able to join us will be able to watch it back and get all of this great knowledge that we're about to get. And we will keep everyone muted for the most part, but if you have a question during the session, Laura is more than happy to pause and answer questions as we go. So just unmute yourself if you would like to ask a question. You're also able to put your question into the chat window if you would like to do that. So without further ado, I am going to turn this over to Laura Drake.
Hi, everybody. My name's Laura. I'm an attorney and I work for Community Fund Ohio, which is a special needs trust organization here in Ohio that serves residents of Ohio. Just so you know, I'm gonna just this little bugger might occasionally pop in the picture because he's sitting right next to me. It's just he doesn't like to get very far from me, and where I normally sit is not an option, so he now can sit next to me. He's very excited. So we're going to talk about trusts and the types of special needs trusts, and then we're going to address stable account in that also. So I am going to share my screen. Okay, there we go. So this has, it's mainly about the private trust, but it also talks about how stable or able or stable accounts in Ohio interact with this. So Community Fund is a nonprofit. It was created actually back in 1993 by most of the Ohio State County DD boards. Out of the 88, I think about 80 or so contributed to create the organization. And the idea behind it was in 1992, they passed a law that allowed pooled trusts to take money on behalf of individuals who had disabilities, so that they would have access to the money to use the funds, but it wouldn't count as a resource, so that someone could have more than, back then, 1,500, but now it's 2,000. So when we talk about money and individuals who are on Medicaid, and I'm not necessarily talking about health insurance, but I am talking about the waiver, especially the waiver. That's the one we're really concerned about. But also SSI, Section 8 housing, any kind of subsidized housing, food stamps, any benefits like those are all asset-based benefits, which means how much money you have and also how much income you have. But we're going to mainly focus how much money you have is relevant to whether or not it's decisive actually on whether or not you're able to get the benefits. And so if you inherit money, is someone who is, sorry about that. There's no stopping them. I usually drive to the other office so that they cannot do this to me. So, but I couldn't do that today. So anyway, but yeah, how much money they have is, if you inherited some money, this would actually be a problem because you would become over-resourced and potentially lose your waiver benefits, right? And that's one time that we think about a trust or stable accounts. And the other time we think about it is mom and dad want to leave money to their child who has a disability, but if they do, the child would be over-resourced, and so that's not an option. And we can't leave it directly to them, so we look at these trust options. So when you're looking at how to where your money should go based on how much you have. A lot of it is actually based on how much you have. So first of all, stable accounts currently allow you to put approximately $15,000, a little bit over that, a year into them. So if I inherit $10,000 from my grandmother and I'm on disability and I don't have any expenditures, I don't need to buy anything that costs $10,000, I'm going to put that into a stable account, right? That's the easiest way to do it. It's a low amount of money, and I can meet that amount. But if I inherit $100,000 from my grandmother, and if my grandmother didn't plan ahead, I'm going to have to look at a pooled trust option. And so when we look at the pooled trust, that's called a payback trust because I inherited the money directly. And so if the money was in my name, I have to put it in what's called a Medicaid payback trust. But if grandma planned ahead and created a wholly discretionary trust, then that would be what Community Fund calls a master trust. And then I get the benefit of that money. But when I pass away, it goes to grandma's other heirs, not necessarily my heirs, because it wasn't my money. When grandma set the trust up, it would go to her heirs. So, sorry, the dogs are playing, and my bottle of water that I used to spray them is just beyond my reach because I didn't think that's true. All right, if it gets bad, I'll run for it. All right, so when we're looking at creating these trusts, this idea of the wholly discretionary trust, one of the first things you have to think about is who is writing the trust. So if you go with that wholly discretionary trust, what Community Fund calls a master trust, Community Fund has the language. So your attorney just has you file a joinder agreement that joins into the existing trust. The advantage of that is that if there's any changes to the law, it's automatically updated by Community Fund. You don't have to worry about that. You don't have to go back to your attorney every few years. As long as your child remains a resident of Ohio, they're eligible to use the Community Fund trust. And if for some reason they left the state of Ohio, the trust could transfer the funds to the state they moved to. If you decide to go with this wholly discretionary trust, right, that's your money, your child gets the benefit of it, or it was your parents, the grandparents' money, and the child's going to get the benefit of it, but then it's going to go to their heirs. You can also hire a private attorney to create that trust. And that's so there, the most important thing is that this attorney is knowledgeable about Medicaid and Social Security, because they have to draft the trust in a way that preserves those benefits. And the most important part about that is that the language in the trust has to be very specific. So in a regular trust that you will do for your typical children, I gotta do this. Sorry. I have to get the water bottle sprayer. Because I'm just realizing it's gonna be a nightmare. So in those regular revocable trusts, you have a standard of care that says provide for my child, for my heirs, my beneficiaries. Those are all basically the same words. Provide for them, pay for their health, education, welfare, support, and maintenance. That's in a standard trust. That cannot be in a trust for somebody who has a disability. That a special needs trust cannot have a standard of care, because the welfare and maintenance, that's technically what SSI is supposed to pay for. And the health, that's what Medicaid health insurance is paying for, right? So we have a standard of care in the trust. It's not a special needs trust. And that's important, because if the attorney doesn't know that, and they put that standard of care in the trust, then the trust is an asset and it would not have been protected. I just had somebody present a trust to me the other day, and it had language about successor trustees and who could name and let the beneficiary name the successor trustee. And there's no hard and fast rule about it, but I talked to several other attorneys and we all agreed you've given the beneficiary, the individual with the disability, a lot of control. And the theory is in these trusts, they're not supposed to have that control. So we all feel that Medicaid might come after that trust and deem it's an asset. And so that's why it's so important to make sure that when you're drafting that when you're hiring an attorney to draft a private special needs trust, that they are up to date on this, that they do a lot of them, that they're familiar with it, and they're staying familiar with the rules and regulations. So that's always important. Now, if you ever need a referral to an attorney, you can email me, and my email is right here at the on the page. But you can email me, and I'm happy to give you names of attorneys in your area who we've seen work on these kinds of trusts before. All right, so that's the first question. Who's going to draw up the trust? Now, if you decide to go with an ABLE account, they're all run by the state treasurers. It's not a trust, it's just a bank account. But all the language is set up, and you just join their account. You go on their online, and you take care of that. And again, if we're talking about an amount less than $15,000, we're always going to look first at the stable account, because that's the fastest and easiest way to do it. If your child is working and earns up to $12,000 a year or more, you can put up to that $12,000 additional. So if they earn $8,000 a year, then you can then you can put $23,000 into the trust. But if they earn $12,000 a year, you can basically put $27,000 a year. I'm sorry, into a stable account, not in the trust. The trust, you can put any amount of money you want, but those stable accounts, we often hear 15,000, but if they're working, we can actually get it up potentially to 27,000 a year. That's important to keep in the back of your mind, because it's kind of helpful. I was just talking to a family the other day, and their son has a 401k, and he's getting older, and they're going to need to start transferring that to a stable. And because he's working, they'll be able to put $27,000 a year into the stable account, which, in 4 or 5 years, they'll be able to get most of the money into the stable account. So that's handy. All right. So when we look at a trust, when we look at our trust options and the stable account, who makes the decision about getting the money out of the trust and staying in compliance with Medicaid? So in a community fund trust, they're the trust advisor. Huntington Bank is the current trustee. So there's oversight by professionally trained people who are going to determine whether or not a distribution is going to impact their Social Security or Medicaid. And then the families choose somebody who's the on the ground person who says, hey, Johnny needs a new pair of shoes. Okay, they're going to pay for that. Medicaid and Social Security allow you to pay for shoes out of the trust. But if you say Johnny needs, went to Kroger and spent $250 on food, they're going to explain to you why that's not going to happen. The trust can't reimburse you. A community fund trust and a private trust, neither of those can reimburse for food. But the trust should explain, hey, if you have a stable account, we can put up to $15,000 a year from either of these trusts into a stable account, and that money can be used for the food, right? So community fund has 3 people who are in charge: community fund, the bank, and then the family member, or the connection to the family, who is what community fund calls the designated advocate. In a private trust, the trustee has the control. Oftentimes in a private trust, you'll create what's called a trust advisor, and that might be a family member, someone like that. So who's going to be the trustee in a private trust? Well, lots of people will choose their family member to be the trustee. I have issues with that. I always think that's a little bit dangerous, because if you name your typical child, the typical sibling, to be the trustee, you have to remember that they get all the money that isn't spent, right? And so that's kind of a conflict of interest, because if I don't spend it on my brother or my sister, I get more, my kids get more, and that can be iffy. And even if your kid wouldn't behave like that, you don't know what their spouse is going to do. And that's just a reality of things. So, because again, there's a vested interest in not paying that out. Additionally, if the trustee makes a mistake and pays for things they cannot pay for out of the trust, Medicaid and Social Security can say the trust is an asset. And if it's drafted properly, there's something called a poison pill, which means the trust terminates and the money goes to the secondary beneficiary, who is oftentimes the trustee. That again is a conflict of interest, because now if I make a mistake, the downside to it is I get all the money in the trust that was supposed to go to my disabled sibling. That's a problem. And an example I'd like to give is swimming with the dolphins. A lot of, it's very popular down in Florida, and a lot of these trusts, the big things they're used for are vacations. We always joke it's Disney and dental. A lot of people go down to Florida on vacation using the trust to pay for the airfare and the hotel, and that's all fine. And they would, go to Disney for the day and go swimming with the dolphins. And the trust will pay for swimming with the dolphins. Not a problem, anytime. But imagine you get an invoice for dolphin therapy. It's the exact same swimming with the dolphins, but some places call it dolphin therapy. I'm not sure what they're thinking, because once you've done that, once you've called it therapy, that's health. And remember, these trusts can't be used for food and health. That's a problem. They can't be used for maintenance and medical, because that's what the state is providing with SSI and Medicaid. So then now Medicaid is never going to pay for dolphin therapy. It's not going to happen. But the trustee has to know that they have to submit the invoice and get the denial. And at that point, then the trust can reimburse for that expense. And if they don't, then the Medicaid and Social Security can make the argument that the trust is an actual resource. It's an asset that's being used to pay for daily expenses. All right. Now, in a stable account, whoever controls the account, they have control about making requests. So when mom and dad set up the account, they're going to continue to keep control. If your child has the capacity to make some of their own decisions and handle a credit card, then they can continue on with that. The one downside to me is with the stable account has always been that when mom and dad are alive, it's not that big of a deal, because mom and dad are really the ones kind of putting the money into the stable account. So I'm not too worried about them taking it out inappropriately. But once mom and dad pass away, whoever has the account login information basically controls the account. And so in theory, they could take all the money out in a very short time. And there's not really any oversight on that, unless you've set it up so very limited amounts of money can come out at a time. But whoever has the passwords can change all those controls. So there's a little bit of issue about security on that, about who's really in charge, because like I said, whoever has the information, the login can request checks to be sent to people, and stable isn't set up to oversee that. In a community fund trust, when we get requests, we've recently been getting a lot of requests for clothes that are not the same size as the beneficiary. It's kind of like a pandemic of issues. I don't really know why, but it started to become a real problem. And or just the clothes were for the wrong gender, which that can be explained away. And we were being told by many a designated advocate that the disabled individual was a cross-dresser. And if that's true, that's fine. But we were like, yeah, but if they wear a size 10 women's, they don't wear a size, 16 men's. Like, that's not how it works. And so our job is to make sure that the money being used from the trust is only going for the benefit of the beneficiary. But if you don't have that kind of oversight, then there's not much you can do about it. In a stable account, there really isn't. And by the way, it's always the siblings who are doing that. So that's a problem that we see currently happening. And like I said, in a stable account, they wouldn't necessarily catch that. Whereas in a community fund, they would. And I think a bank as the trustee would also catch that. So the trustee choice is very important, because it's a lifelong choice. And I think parents oftentimes names their own siblings, the aunts and uncles as the initial trustees, and that makes a lot of sense. Grandparents too, when you're young and your children are young. But as you age, so do your other trustees, and you need that next generation. And again, I'm always worried when you're naming the residual beneficiary, your typical child who will get what's left in that trust if it's not spent. There's a concern for me about that. And it's a decision, it's something you have to put into process and think about when you're making that decision. All right. So who stays on top of any changes in Medicaid and Social Security and Ohio laws that might impact trust or the account? Well, community fund, like I said this before, they update the trust agreement periodically to make sure it complies with any current laws. So we saw changes a few years ago that required some changes to our trust. So we've been around since 1993. I think we're on the 14th restatement of one and the 5th or 6th of the other. They don't change terribly often, but you want to make sure that they're ready to do that. If you have hired a private attorney to create your trust, you're going to need to pay people to look in and check in on it and make sure that it's the most up-to-date trust and that there hasn't been a change in the laws. And that's going to be your responsibility when you choose a private trust. And it's not to say it's not a good choice. It's just you need to take that into consideration when you're doing that. As far as stable, the treasurer takes care of that. They update all the accounts. And the big things, honestly, when they've updated the stable account, it's usually been giving the beneficiaries more access to more funds, or able to put more money in. And it's usually giving them more things. That's really handy. We like those updates. So what are the costs of all these things? Well, so community fund, like if you wanted to create, remember I talked about there are two different types of trusts. There's the payback trust. That's the benefit, the individual with the disability has money more than $15,000. So we can't put it in a stable. So they inherit $100,000 from grandma. Well, if that happens, you would actually pay $1,000 to set up that payback trust, because you have the money goes in at one time. But if you're looking at like planning for yourself to figure out what to do, what am I going to do with my money to make sure my child gets the benefit of it? Then with community fund, you might create what's called a dry trust. So you set the whole trust up, you make sure it's all good. You pay $750. You don't pay anything else until it hits $15,000, which is when you've died. You usually don't fund these trusts until you've died. There's no real reason to fund them, before you're dead. So then when you die and you hit their shares deposit and it's more than $15,000, there's another $750. Okay. So then after that, the trust charges $250 for the first $50,000 each year, and then 0.25 on everything over 50,000. Okay. Compare that with a private bank or a private trustee. A private bank and a private trustee. So if you name your typical child or the niece or nephew or whatever, they are entitled to take approximately 2% of the value of the trust every year. So if it's $100,000, yeah, that'd be $2,000, right? Is that right? Yeah. I'm horrible at math. So it'd be a fairly, I mean, it's not that much of a fee really, but if it's more than $100,000, it can get kind of to be a lot. The fee can be quite high. You can see $20,000 annual fees on $500,000 accounts and things like that, because there's just a lot of money in the trust. So they're going to take that 2%. In all of these situations, now in those, the trustee will charge 2%, and then you would also pay your investment advisor, and that's probably going to be an additional percentage for buying and selling stocks and things like that. Now in the community fund trust, Huntington just charges an 89 basis points, which is like 0.89%. I don't really understand, but you guys know that stuff, right? I don't know. It's like a percentage. They charge a fee based on the total contribution. And so it is less than 2%. So, and that includes all their tax preparation and services and all the check fees. They don't charge extra stuff for that. The only additional cost that isn't included in this is if you want a check overnighted. It used to be that before they instituted a fee, everybody wanted their check overnight. Oh, we need that overnight. We need that overnighted. And community fund was paying a lot in overnight charges. And so they now have said, that's it. You want it overnighted, that's fine, but you have to pay the overnight fee. And I think it's just like $50 or something like that. And so that's the only hidden fee that I always like to point out. But so that's the what's out there on those. Now, stable accounts are the better deal. Okay. If you're an Ohio resident, they charge you a whopping $2.50 a month versus $250 a year. I mean, there's no comparison. It's like a bank account, right? And so it's in there, and you can access it, and they're going to charge this very small fee each month, but it's, you can set it up. If you want your child to be able to go to GameStop, but no place else, you can let them spend $34 a month at GameStop, or, $37.50 with tax. You can let them go to the Walgreens and spend up to $10 a day, or, wherever it is that they can go, that you're comfortable with them spending the money. They'll text you like, oh, the credit card was used here, blah, blah, blah. It's amazing. And all that for $2.50 a month. So it's a really very good deal, quite honestly. The downside to the stable account in these other documents, in a private trust or a pooled trust, in either of those kinds of documents, it's going to say when the beneficiary dies, it's going to say this is where the money goes. All right. You'll have decided that when you create the document. It goes back to me, it goes to, well, probably not back to you because you shouldn't really fund these until you die. But it'll go to your other kids, charity of your choice, your trust, wherever you want it to go. In a stable account, the difference is you actually have to go to probate to get it. So you may need to hire an attorney to do that. Some people can do it without an attorney. It's not that hard, but it's a lot of paperwork to look at and make sure you file everything correctly. But you would have to file something with a probate court to transfer that money. And so that's kind of an extra step in there. But again, the benefits of the stable account are so huge that I think people feel that it's worth it. It is worth it. Also, another advantage of a stable account is that it usually, remember, the stable account overwhelmingly is going to be the beneficiary's money. That's a lot of what a stable account's used for. But also, if you're trying to subsidize their housing, if you pay for your child, if your child lives independently and they live in an apartment, their SSI is not going to get them a very nice apartment. But you might decide, okay, you know what, we'll pay an extra $500, $600, $800 a month so they live in a nicer apartment. If you pay that directly, that's in-kind maintenance and in-kind income, and that would count against their SSI. So if you're giving them $800 a month, they're going to lose about $300 to $600 a month, $300 to $500 a month, and Social Security. Their check will actually be lowered because you've been providing them with additional support. Funny thing, if you put that same amount of money, that same $500 or $800 into the stable account, and then the rent is paid from the stable account, that's totally allowable. Their SSI check will not be in any way, shape, or form impacted. That is a game changer if you're trying to provide for your child. If your child, again, SSI just doesn't go that far. And so you want to provide them with extra money for eating out and things like that. If you pay them for them to eat out, technically that's income, and their Social Security payments should actually be lowered. But if you put the same money into a stable account, they have a charge card and they can go to Applebee's or Jeff Ruby's, or, I don't know, they can go wherever they want. That's fine. That's an allowable expense, and it's not in-kind support and maintenance, and their Social Security would not be lowered. That's true for all of these, but remember the trust, the wholly discretionary trusts and the payback trust, any of those, and all three of those types of trusts, those, if you can't pay for housing and you can't pay for food, but you can with the stable account. And this is the most important thing. Again, if I have either a community fund payback or master trust, or I have a private wholly discretionary trust, all three of those vehicles should be able to transfer up to $15,000 or whatever the max is, because the max does change. It gets higher. So, a couple of years, I'm sure it'll be 16,000. So I can transfer up to $16,000 a year from these trusts into the stable account. So even after you're gone, you can be subsidizing their housing. And I would say one thing about that is, if that's the plan, if you're going to be subsidizing their housing and using these trusts, you want to make sure that the trustee, depending on who's in charge of the trust, of the stable account, okay, you might want the trustee to write a check each month and not pay $15,000 all at once. I know of a case where the individual, the beneficiary, had control, and they were also manic. They had manic tendencies, and they got all the money and they blew it. And then there's nothing anyone could do. They couldn't transfer more money in, but the designated advocate had asked for all the money to go in on January 1st. And so, community fund did that. And then the beneficiary just blew it all in a few weeks on crap. And there's really nothing anyone can do about that. You can't add another 15,000 in. So, and that's, again, the problem with the stable account is, who has control of the account? Are they doing the right things? But at least if you're putting small amounts at a time, then you're avoiding everything being gone and some huge problem that you have to try and fix afterwards. All right. Do you guys have any questions? I'm gonna take, somebody once told me it looks like when I'm doing this, it looks like I'm drinking from a flask, but it's just water. Promise. I promise. I have one that's really dark purple and it does look like I'm drinking from a wine bottle, but this is blue. It's a little more obvious. Okay.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
So if my daughter starts, for instance, she wants to start a job this summertime.
Yep.
And obviously, if she works all summer, she could definitely get over the cap that would be problematic for the waiver. Would that be able then, that's a perfect time to start that stable account and that can act as a protected checking account. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a savings, but yes, I mean, they will issue, you don't get a check. So I would call it a savings account because you don't get a
Sure.
checkbook. You can
Sure.
ask them to write a check for you. So, the money that she saves up is not a resource, is not an asset, but her income is her income. So if she actually made so much, that could impede her waiver, but I don't think so. You'd have to make a lot to, she'd have to
Yeah,
make like 2,400, she'd have to make like $2,500 a month for it to impede her waiver. So
Yeah, it would. She's 15, so it would just
yeah,
be
exactly. That's
yeah.
yeah.
Okay,
So
cool.
but that is exactly, that's the time you start this. When they're making money now, that's when you start using a stable account. And like I said, you can issue her a credit card and you can say which store she can go. You can get it so it texts you if she uses it. And so you know exactly what's going on. It's a great way for you to see if she's responsible with money and kind of control it, but maybe not too much, depending on what you need to do. So it's going to give you a lot of flexibility. And I think that's exactly what the stable account should be used for. And if she did earn more than $15,000, if she wanted to save more than 50, so let's say you wanted to put money into the stable account, which I'm not actually suggesting that you necessarily do, but I think you can put up to $4,000 and you wouldn't pay Ohio state income tax on that. But since
Mhm.
it's not, that's not really to me. Wow.
Sure.
But it's something to think about. But if you wanted to add two, you could put the 15,000 plus whatever her gross amount of wages are for 2022, you can put that into the stable account. So if she could make 5, 6, 7, 10,000, 12, 15,000 in the summer. I used to teach swimming lessons and I raked it in when I was a kid in the summers for 2 months. 2 months sustained me and paid for a lot of college. I'm old. I am, because college was like $1,000 a year. But you could put that additional money into the stable account. So if you wanted to subsidize it beyond what she made, you'd have an ability to put in more than you normally would. Now, and the only reason I also mention that is if she has a 529 that you're worried might have been a mistake, this would be an opportunity to transfer money from her 529 into a stable account. If that's going to happen, you need to reach out to stable. You need to talk to them directly. But there's a mechanism, I believe, to do that, to transfer money from a 529 into a stable. And normally you'd be maxed out at 15,000 a year. But if she's earning, you could actually increase that. So
Sure. And is this like at any bank they would do the stable account, or does it need to go through that Huntington?
No, well, so Huntington is community fund. It doesn't have anything to do with stable account. The
Okay.
stable account, you have to go to stableaccount.com, and it's not a bank. It's the treasurer's office runs it. I think they are associated with a bank, but I think it might be Fifth Third, but you couldn't go to Fifth Third Bank and open this account. You can only do it online at stableaccount.com.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that's the only way you can access it. So
okay. Thank you.
and they have different mechanisms. So you can invest it like in a Vanguard account, aggressive, moderate, conservative, or you can just put it into a regular savings account, which
Sure.
is FDIC insured. So, but
Okay.
at her age, invest it. So,
Yep. Thank you.
do you guys have any other questions? So the thing to remember about all of these trust options are that they are a way of protecting your child. So back in the day, and still there are still some attorneys, and I know one of them, and I really disdain him, who will tell you to disinherit your child with a disability. And that's a horrible advice, in my opinion. your child with a disability is going to have if you are able to leave them something, it's going to give them more options. And that's really important. So I grew up with an aunt who was developmentally disabled. And, my grandparents died when they were very young. They were both 52 when they died, and she was, and they had kids when they were 20. So, so she was 30. She wasn't 30. She just turned 30, I think. And, so, when they died, and they couldn't leave her anything. They had to disinherit her because it was 1972, and that's what you did. And one of the things they couldn't afford was dental. And she also, when she passed away, she had one tooth left. And we're from Iowa, and corn on the cob is a big darn deal there. And she could still take out a whole corn on the cob with that tooth. It was amazing. But she should have had dental care. You know what I mean? If the money had been set into a trust, it would have been clearly earmarked as hers, and then they could have been paying for root canals so she could have kept a few more teeth. Now, as it was split between my mom and my uncle, and I think the issue with that was that my mom was 30 something, and she said okay, and my uncle was 19, and he said we spent all her money, and so it kind of became a thing. And this is the only way you can be sure that your wishes are met, is if you actually place the money for their benefit. And if you plan ahead, Medicaid will not get any of that money. It is your money. It is never your child with a disability's money. They just get the use of it, of what they need. And whatever they don't use will go to your other typical kids. But it gives them options, and that's really important. So I'd always be hesitant if you talk to an attorney who talks about disinheriting your child. Well, I would actually say leave. You should never work with an attorney who talks about disinheriting your child. I don't understand that. That's a horrible, horrible advice. So in my personal opinion. So, but planning ahead is going to get you the most options. You're going to definitely want to look at a private trust if your number one goal is that they live in the family home after you pass away, and you believe that's a viable option with support and the waiver. That's fine. But a pooled trust is not going to likely take your house, not going to own a house, because they're centralized and they can't be responsible for homes all over the state of Ohio. So you're going to have to look at a private trust in that situation. But when you're looking at these private trusts, you have to be realistic, because again, the trustee is going to take a fee off what the trust is worth. And if it's only worth $100,000, that's not enough fee for a bank to be interested in it. They're just not going to take it. And that's again when you're going to be pushed into a pooled trust. And so what I always tell people, listen, if you want the what you believe is the flexibility of having a bank as a trustee, that's fine. But you have to make sure the attorney is giving the trustee the right, the power to move all the money into a pooled trust, because at some point they start to run out of money, and then the banks don't want them anymore. And so if they don't have that, they're going to hire an attorney and charge the trust like $7,000 to $10,000 to reform the trust so they can move the money to a pooled trust. So if you don't plan ahead, in the end, then why it's so important to meet with an attorney who knows what they're doing, and to have questions for them about how you're going to address it. Ask them what the waivers are. If they don't know the IO and help and self-waiver, that's concerning, because that means they're not used to working with people in the DD community. And that's important, because that's what you need, someone who knows that world. You want to talk to them about how many trusts they've created. Who do they recommend as the trustee? There are attorneys I know, and they say, oh, just name your typical kids. And you know why? Because they don't have anyone in their life who has special needs. So they don't know what they're asking. I mean, and it's different. I also work with lots of families who have mentally ill children. And a lot of the times in that situation, but also in the DD world, sometimes the siblings have resentment towards their sibling with a disability. You need to be aware that can happen. And you need to take that into consideration, and not presume that your child is going to do exactly what you want for their sibling. You can't control that. And so you need to have taken that into consideration. Like I said, your child won't be like that, but their spouse might be. Their spouse might see resentment. But what I always try and explain is that when you pass away and you're asking your typical children to care for their sibling with a disability, they have just lost their parent also. And so they're mourning. They are still working because they're going to be working until they're 70. They've got kids and grandkids of their own that they're taking care of, right? And now you've asked them to become the trustee of this trust. Plus, they now have to take their sibling to their doctor's appointments and meet with the DD people and set up with the providers and take care of all this stuff and entertain them. And they're overwhelmed. And so when you also ask them to very quickly overnight learn to be a trustee of a special needs trust, learn everything you know about Medicaid and SSI right away, so you don't mess up when you make these distributions, that's too much. It's just too much to ask of somebody. And that's why I think it's really important to understand that you need to look at outside trustees. If you don't want to go with the pooled trust, that's fine, but you should choose a bank that's in your area that can act as the trustee. And that's because they're going to give your children are still involved as the trust advisors, but they're not responsible for all these decisions. They're just, again, saying, hey, Joey needs money for this. And that's up to the trustee to determine whether or not that's an appropriate expense and what to do with it and how to handle it. And so, and leave that expertise up to the people who are experts in that field. So I think that's a big thing to kind of keep in the back of your mind when you're looking at these options. Do you guys have any more questions? So what I always like to point, I'm going to move this back up here to the beginning to the top. You are always welcome to reach out to me, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have at any time about this stuff. It's what I do. So I can, like I said, I can help you find an attorney in your area up in Miami County. I have several in Montgomery. And I think some a little further north, and I think I have one in Miami who have done these kinds of trusts before. And so we can connect you with those. And help you make the next step. If you have questions about any of this stuff, feel free to reach out to me. If you have questions about the stable accounts, I'm going to recommend that you go to stableaccount.com. That is a separate entity than what we do. We work with stable accounts a lot. I actually present a lot with people from stable account. So I know their spiel. I could almost do their PowerPoint. I could actually do the PowerPoint at this point, but if I had the PowerPoint, I could do it. But so I'm familiar with a lot of it, but if you have very specific questions, they're going to be the better resource for that. But I'm happy to talk about how they interplay and how they work together. So that's at any time. So yes, and Melissa put that in the chat, which I appreciate. So that's something to. Those are some options out there. And you can always check our website, which is communityfundohio.com. We just redid our website. We just changed our name. It was Community Fund Ohio. No, what was it? Community Fund Management Foundation, which was, I can't even remember our name. Just changed it. So we decided it was too long. And I'm like, I don't think we really made it any shorter, but okay. Whatever. It's the little things. So, and that'll talk a little about trust. And, and so I did talk a lot about like what these trusts won't pay for. They won't pay for food. They won't pay for housing. They won't pay for medical that is covered by Medicaid, which means they won't pay for a tooth extraction, but they'll pay for root canal. And that people say, well, what can they pay? Well, they can pay their cell phone bill and their cable bill. They can pay for their pet. And they can actually pay for a therapy dog, which those are very expensive. So that's kind of a nice thing, but they can also pay for all their pet expenses. They can pay for respite care for you also to provide a break. They can provide for movies and nights out, but we see vacations are a big part of it. So they can pay for the hotel, airfare, entrance into all the things. And oddly, it goes back and forth on whether or not they can pay for food when they're on vacation. Sometimes they can, and sometimes Medicaid says, no, don't do that. And they change the rules a lot, quite honestly. So it's our job to just pay attention to what the rules are. For a long time, they wouldn't pay for a companion to go, like a caregiver, and now they will pay for that again. So it's our job to stay abreast of that and know what you can and can't pay for. And that's again why a private trust, when you name a family member to that role, I think it's an unrealistic expectation that they're going to get it all right. Even if they're not trying to mess up, they sometimes are just going to mess up because it's just hard to do everything perfectly. Medicaid just changes the rules sometimes, and you just have to be aware. You have to know where to look for all the rules, and you're not going to always be able to do that. And you can see mistakes happen that way. So that's why I think a trustee being a bank or being a pooled trust, I think that's an advantage, because their job is to stay abreast of the rules. So, all right. I never end early. I'm ending early. I don't know why. It just flowed really well tonight. You can ask. I usually take up more time than I'm entitled to. So,
No, we usually do fill up a whole hour. But I think that like you said, the information just flowed tonight. We had a few good questions. Before we close, going once, going twice, does anybody else have some questions for Laura?
I'm just wondering, am I able to get a copy of this in any way that has all this information?
yeah, Melissa has it. I sent it to her in 2021, but I can send it to her again.
I was just going to
She can
ask you, is it the same document? I didn't know if you'd made any tweaks. I do still have.
No, I didn't. Nothing's happened in the last 18 months because the world has come to an under standstill. So, yep, it's the exact same document.
I am going to type my email address into, actually, if you just want to email us at info@riversidedd.org and let me know, I will receive that email. Let me know that you would like me to email that document back to you, and I'll make sure that you get it. We'll also, I've recorded this, so we will have this information session posted on our YouTube channel as well, if you want to watch it back.
Okay.
So I can put that link in the email as well. So
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. But we truly appreciate your time, Laura. We recognize that this is a service that you provide to families in Ohio, and you're a very, very busy person. So we appreciate your expertise.
I love doing it anytime. I love doing it. So it's always, and I can't believe the dogs have behaved. They probably actually run away. That's why, but I'll find them.
I think we've all gotten used to that through the pandemic. We've gotten used to all of our furry friends joining us for these Zoom calls, but we really.
I have a coworker and she's like, I can't talk to anyone. The kids are at home. They'll make noise. I'm like, everyone is used to kids making noise. Nobody cares anymore.
It's definitely reframed what professionalism looks like, doesn't it?
Exactly. That's right.
Okay, well, I'm going to stop